Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu Samad.
So welcome back. We're at number 74, and let's just jump right into what we've been driving. So Sam, I have a long treatise on what I spent the most time in this week. But before we get to that,
I actually spent quite a bit of time. I put more miles on the car I had last week than I typically do in a normal week as well.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that's what I definitely put on more miles than I normally do. But you probably enjoyed yours more.
Yeah, somewhat. I had the 2018 Ford Mustang GT Performance Pack Level 2.
Okay, so Level 2 means what?
So basically, Level 2, they've had the Performance Pack on the Mustang, available on the Mustang GT, actually going back to the previous generation. Level 2 basically ups the ante some more, and essentially splits the difference between the existing GT Performance Pack, excuse me, and the GT350. It's set up to be more of a track car. So if you don't want to go all the way up to a GT350, but you want a really track-oriented Mustang, this is the one to get.
I mean, okay, so first of all, I can't understand why you wouldn't want to go to a GT350, but there are probably reasons.
I mean, it depends on your budget.
Okay.
A GT350 is going to cost you about another 10 grand on top of what this one costs.
Yeah, but it's still like, okay, so this is a $55,000 Mustang?
This one was 46.
Okay, so wow, the GT350 only starts at 55?
Yeah, something like that.
Somewhere
in the mid 50s.
I remember being super impressed with the value. So for 46 though, that's got to be a ridiculously good car for the money.
It is. It is. It's really good. So when you get the Performance Pack Level 2, the main visual changes are there's a new front splitter and a new rear spoiler, and the front splitter extends out a good 2-3 inches from the lower edge of the front fascia. And, so it's way out there. So you do want to make sure that you're, taking some care if you're going up steep driveway ramps and things like that. Cause it will scrub. I mean, it's got a bit of flexibility to it, so it's not going to shatter, if you hit one, as long as you're not going too fast, but you might scrub it if you're not careful. And then, a rear lip spoiler on the rear edge of the deck, and the combination of those two do actually generate some downforce, some extra downforce on the car. I forget the exact number. Back last fall when they first told us about it, we were in the wind tunnel, and I think it generates about 100 pounds of downforce at about 70 miles an hour, something like that, which is pretty significant.
That's enough to keep the back end on the ground. Yeah.
And then of course you also get a set of 19-inch alloy wheels that are unique to the Level 2 pack, with Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires on there, which when they delivered the car last Tuesday or Monday, whatever it was, that when they delivered the car, I took a look at the tires and I looked up at the sky. And then I pulled up my phone to look at the weather forecast to make sure there was no rain in the forecast, because these are definitely not tires. The ones that were on there, had some miles on them. They had been, they'd been put to work by somebody. But even, fresh Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires are definitely not wet weather tires. These are tires you want to avoid driving in the rain on these things, because essentially the entire outer half of the tire has very minimal tread grooves, and once they've got any wear on them at all, they're essentially almost slicks.
But that's why they're so good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think at Gingerman Raceway, which is a track. It's a club track here on the west side of Michigan, where they frequently go testing with the Mustangs. A lot of companies do testing out there, but Ford goes out there regularly with the Mustangs. I think they said they knocked about 3 or 4 seconds a lap off with the level 2 versus the standard, the level 1 performance pack, which is pretty significant.
And so level 2 changes. Like getting back to that, that's tires. It's not brakes, right? The brakes are already...
the brakes are the same. You get the 6-piston Brembo front calipers, 15-inch brake rotors, or 15-inch rotors. You also do get some slightly revised spring rates.
Oh, okay.
And a set of the Magna Ride dampers.
So that will help.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that'll help you take some time off the laptop. But 3 seconds around that's... for most courses, that's a significant improvement.
Like I said, it basically it splits the difference in lap times between a standard Mustang GT performance pack and a GT350. So it's really good. And the amazing thing is, and the tires are 305 37 19s. So these are essentially what they did was they put in the widest possible tires they could that don't extend beyond the bodywork.
Yeah, like that's those are like the size of the Countach rear tires from back in the day.
Yeah,
maybe not quite as wide.
I think the Countach tires were about the same width, about 305s, and these are 305s on all 4 corners, so it's the same size on all corners.
On 19s, like that.
On 19s, yes.
Jesus.
Yeah, back in the Countach days, I think they had like 305s or 315s, but they were on 17-inch wheels. These are on 19s. And
17s were huge then too. Like most cars had 13s or 14s.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal back in the 1970s when I think the Porsche 930 was the first car to come to market, the first production car to have 50 series tires on there, and those were on 15-inch wheels. And that was like the first generation Pirelli P7.
And now, now I think Camrys have 50 series tires.
Yeah, I mean most cars like the Camry and Accord come standard with 16-inch wheels. And you can get 18s and 19s from the factory, so this one's got 19s on it, because it gives enough clearance for those 15-inch rotors, but they didn't go any bigger. And, on other Mustangs, without the performance pack, you can get 20-inch wheels on there. But on the performance packs, they've always limited it to 19 because, as you go bigger and bigger with the wheels get a lot heavier. The wheels and tires get heavier, and that adds unsprung weight and actually, reduces, generally makes the handling worse. So they've always limited the performance packs to 19s, and it's the same thing on the, I think on the GT350. I think it's also on 19s, because that gives them enough clearance for those 15-inch brakes on the front, but without adding too much extra weight. So, but the Magna Ride dampers, make a huge difference because, I drove this car from, here just outside of Ann Arbor to Pittsburgh and back, and, it's a remarkably comfortable car to drive in, over that distance. Even on the pavement around here, which is often really horrible, it's not an uncomfortable car to drive. Those dampers, no matter what car you put them on, they do an amazing job of providing real-time changes in the suspension control, so that even on terrible pavement, you can still get decent suspension travel and decent ride quality. And then as soon as you start to push into a corner, then it just tightens right up. So they're really phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that's one of the takeaways from everything I've ever driven with that technology on it. I'm going to say the word magneto-rheological because it's just fun to say.
That's the generic term for it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and everything I've ever really driven with those kind of dampers on it, I'm always astounded by how compliant it is when you consider that it's usually on higher performance cars, and that you drive them around and you go, this thing has a ton of capability, but you can totally live with it every day. And that's one of the technologies that has allowed that, versus the old days where, the cars would just rattle your teeth out.
Yeah. Well, they were, for those that don't know, the magnetorheological fluid is basically a hydraulic fluid that has, iron particles in a suspension in the fluid. And so when you pass an electric current through it, it changes it, it aligns the particles, and it can change the viscosity of the fluid instantaneously. So you can have it be tight, you can have it be more viscous and tighten up, it tightens up the damping rates, or, you can make it less viscous, and give it, allow the dampers to move more, and give you more compliance in your ride. And it can change state, in about a couple of 100 milliseconds, which is pretty amazing. And it was originally the technology, these dampers were originally developed by Delphi back in the late 1990s when it was still part of GM. And I think the first manufacturer to actually use these things was not GM, but Ferrari. Ferrari's used them on a number of models over the years, and they've been used by a number of different manufacturers. At some point during Delphi's years-long bankruptcy reorganization, they spun off that division, and it's now owned by a Chinese company, but it's still based here in Michigan. And they, so they sell those. You can buy them aftermarket as well, but it's more complicated to install them than putting regular dampers on.
Oh, now I really want to.
I think you
upgrade
can buy them aftermarket.
I'd have to
get
like
get them aftermarket.
Accelerometers, and there's a lot of hardware you need to do that.
Oh yeah, it's not a trivial thing, but it's worth it. I mean, if you really want to maximize the performance and still have a vehicle that can ride pretty decently, so you can use it as a track car and a street car. I think one of the first cars that I ever tried them on was back about 10, 11 years ago on the Cadillac CTS-V. And then the previous generation Corvette ZR1 had them as well, and I've driven them on a few cars over the years, but they're always fantastic.
Yeah, and it just makes a great car better. So, like, my assumption is that if you were to step into a regular Mustang GT or even like a performance pack, level 1 car, it would feel sloppy compared to the one you just got out of.
By comparison, the GT is always pretty tight anyway. But and compared to this one, I think it would be you would definitely feel the difference. Primarily because of those dampers. And they've done along with the design refresh that the Mustang got this year with the new tail lights and the new front fascia, a little more aggressive looking. One of the other things they added for the GT is the active exhaust system. So, when you change drive modes between normal and Sport Plus and track mode, there's an active valve in the exhaust that makes it progressively louder. But there's also they added what they call a good neighbor mode. So there's a quiet mode in there. And, so it makes it significantly quiet. It makes the exhaust significantly quieter. And when you can also you can go into the settings and you can program it. So during specific hours, it automatically defaults to quiet mode when you start the car, because otherwise it just defaults to whatever you had it on last. But you can set it, so if you come in, if you're leaving early in the morning, or if you're coming in late at night, you can have it automatically be in quiet mode as you drive through your neighborhood, so you're not annoying your neighbors. That's which is kind of a cool little thing to do.
I mean, that's so polite. That's just, I don't know, the amount of annoyance that I get from my neighbors. I just run the thing open all the time. I guess though, like, so, and you had an S197 too, so
yeah,
the strides that the Mustang has made, even in the last 10 years, like it's really a pretty full-fledged like GT or sports car now from where it had been.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, going from the S197, which was the previous generation, to the S550, which is the one that debuted in 2014, for the 50th anniversary. It's a vastly more sophisticated car. The S197, the S197 was much improved from the Fox body generations before it, but, it was still relatively cheap and crude. It still had a live rear axle, which, for drag racing was great. But, for, when the roads got rough, it could still get a little bit unruly. And, going to the S550 generation, the current generation, it's such a much more sophisticated car. I mean, it still has Mustang character in it. It's, when you step on it, this thing's loud. That 5-liter V8 is a fantastic engine. And they added, another feature that they added this year. If you get the automatic, the 10-speed automatic that replaced the 6-speed this year, there's also a drag mode in there, which, when you engage the drag mode, basically it keeps the torque on in the engine, as it's going through shifts. So it's basically like, slamming through the gears as you shift it.
Like stepless kind of.
Yeah. So, you don't have as much drop off. So I can't remember how much they said, but, it cut like one or 2 tenths off the quarter mile time. It's not something you probably want to use all the time, because it's probably going to, have some durability issues for the transmission, or it's certainly not going to be very comfortable to drive all the time. The car I drove, had the 6-speed manual and a set of Recaros, which, every car should have Recaro seats in them.
Every car can have Recaro seats in them.
That's true.
Because you can order Recaro seats. Actually,
you can go buy Recaro seats for almost any car and bolt them in.
Yeah, it's funny. They have like new seats. I get press releases from them. They have right now. You could buy Recaro seats for whatever you wanted in new expert houndstooth upholstery. Was the one that I got?
I think that's a heritage model that they introduced to like celebrate like the 1970s Porsche 930s that had Recaros in there. And you can also get Recaro seats for your office. You can get Recaro office chairs.
That's true. Yeah, and the story behind
They're ridiculously
Recaro,
expensive, but you can get them.
Yeah, I think Recaro and Momo were the same founder, or something. I forget.
I don't think so. Momo was an Italian company. Recaro is German.
I forget now. Oh, but these look good. I got the press release now. It's that Porsche Houndstooth. Oh man, that's a good looking seat.
Yeah,
that's yeah. Here, let me.
But they don't come cheap though.
No, but they're worth it. I mean, you think about what you do in a car, right?
You know the other thing Recaro does. They don't just make seats for cars.
They make child seats. I know that.
They make child seats. They also make airplane seats.
Do they really?
Yeah, a lot of airliners have Recaro seats in there. If you fly anywhere, there's a pretty decent chance you'll be sitting in a Recaro seat.
Oh,
granted, it won't be as comfortable and supportive as the one in this Mustang, but it may very well be a Recaro seat.
Yeah, well, and that's probably because like that's the volume business that lets Recaro make race car seats.
Yeah, exactly.
And you probably in some airplanes you use an AmSafe airbag equipped seatbelt, which they were a past client of ours, and Ford has picked that up in some of their. I don't think it's actually AmSafe technology, but it is like a seatbelt that's almost like a bag, and it has a airbag.
Ford was the first one to introduce that on the Explorer when the current generation Explorer came out in 2010.
Yeah, so that's something that came out of aviation, at least like the first practical application. And they're like chief engineers now. I think he's at NHTSA.
Oh, I like the seat.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a classic 1970s, early 80s Recaro seat.
It's a beautiful seat.
Yeah. The ones in the Mustang are, the lighter weight, almost shell, like the whole back. It has very few adjustments. Basically, the only adjustments it has are fore aft and the rake of the seat back. And then there's a fixed headrest, just a single piece shell on the back with big bolsters on it.
Yeah. Well, and like, so auto, like when you're buying a seat as, say, Ford, it's probably a much less expensive unit cost than the aftermarket Recaro with all the bells and whistles and super special upholstery and stuff. They're all built to a price. So.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I really liked the seats in the GT350, which was the last Mustang I drove.
Yeah, those are the same seats that are in this GT.
Yeah,
the Recaros.
Those are great.
They are.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds like the Mustang gets a ringing endorsement. How many miles did you put on it? Like 700 or 800?
No, it was about altogether. Plus, I had a couple other meetings when I was back here. Probably about 600 miles.
That's enough to not want to give it back.
Yeah. No, definitely. I could definitely live with this car. The other thing about the Mustang too, not the Mustang.
No, I got it.
Also the Mustang.
I was going to let it pass.
Mustangs, even the S197, have had one of the big advantages they have over the Camaro and the Challenger is outward visibility. Especially like when they went from the S197 to the S550, one of the things, that changed in the design was, that it's got, the fastback. So there's less, on the previous generation, the trunk lid was up higher than it is on the S550 by a couple of inches at least. And if you look at it in profile, you have the belt line that goes up and it continues up all the way to the back edge of the car. Whereas, if you look at the current Mustang, it tapers down more towards the back. And so between that, you have great rearward visibility. You've got fairly big side glass for a sports car and comparatively slim A-pillars. So you actually have shockingly good visibility out of this thing, for any modern car, but particularly for a modern sports car. Yeah.
And that's what, like, sort of the downfall for sure of the Camaro is it's just dismal to be in. And the Challenger is better, but it has some rear visibility challenges. No pun intended.
Yeah, well, and also the Challenger, because it's an LX, it's got that higher belt line, so you feel like you're sitting down lower in the car versus in the Mustang.
Yeah, that's true.
The Mustang just as a whole feels like the car is lower and you don't really feel like you're sunk down into it. And, the Camaro's got that same problem of, the high belt line and the narrow greenhouse, the shallow greenhouse, which means you basically can't see out of the thing.
Yeah. I mean, the Mustang has that's an important car for Ford, and I think they know it, and they keep it as good as it can possibly be.
The last car for Ford. It'd be pretty much the last car for Ford, at least in North America.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind them making a Mustang active. They might as well just call it the Bronco.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going to continue doing, high performance models out of Ford or Ford Performance. I mean, we've already got the Edge ST. And I wouldn't be surprised to see, a Bronco ST or more likely, they may use, something like the Raptor badging. They've already done the Bronco or the Ranger Raptor for the Australian market. And, there's rumors that we're going to get that one here as well. So, it would make sense to maybe do a Bronco Raptor.
Anytime Ford does the high performance thing, they do a pretty good job at it. They have an impressive array of engines right now that I'm pretty impressed by, with the the EcoBoost stuff and the Coyote V8 and I forget what the flat plane one is called, but Voodoo, that's right.
Yeah.
They got a 3-cylinder and a 4-cylinder. Like, they've got a pretty good range of engines.
And a diesel V6 in the F-150 that I'm driving this week.
Yes, that's true. I can see them sort of following the Dodge Chrysler pattern and just looking at profit and going, yeah, we don't need to sell these cars that nobody buys in the US and just, make the stuff that's profitable and really tear down the line.
It's interesting. I didn't put it on the rundown, but there was a report late last week that the current Fusion, they're going to keep building the Fusion sedan that we have today for another 3 or 4 years. Basically just keep tweaking it a little bit, but no major changes because they're just now launching it into the police market. But reports are that the Fusion sedan is going to get replaced by a new wagon, which is going to be kind of a sport wagon crossover thing, kind of like the Buick Regal Tour X, essentially targeted at the Subaru Outback market. So, we may actually finally get the Fusion wagon that we've wanted for so long, a Mondeo wagon. It's just going to be sitting a little higher than it should.
Yeah, but what's going to be a shame is that's going to come out and it's going to get ignored. And then they're going to be like, why? Because there's I think the Outback niche, you're going to have a tough time competing there. You're going to find saturation really fast with a car like that. I don't know that there's that much room for something besides.
Yeah, it depends on how far they go with it. Exactly how they execute it. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do it exactly like the Outback.
Yeah.
But there could be room for a vehicle in that segment. Especially if they're sharing a platform. Sharing the transverse unibody platform, that's going to be used for the Escape and the Edge and numerous other crossovers. Just have one that's a little more car-like. Instead of having a utility-like car, it'll be more like a car-like utility.
Hey, you know what? Whatever sells enough to keep them making stuff like the Mustangs. Right?
Exactly.
And the Ford GT, it's the Porsche thing. Everybody complained about the Cayenne and the Panamera to a certain degree, and even the Boxster, right? When that first came out, there's still a lot of people that feel like that's not a real Porsche. And it's just fine, you're entitled to your opinion, but
you're wrong.
It's a pretty damn good car. And,
just because the engine's not behind the rear axle. Even 911 race cars are mid-engine now.
It's
the 911 RSR has the engine. They flipped the whole powertrain around, and the engine's now in front of the rear axle.
Well, the amount of work they have to do to make the 911, and it's amazing to drive because it's so well behaved. But with the engine hanging out back there, they've got active engine mounts that stiffen up when you get on the power, so the thing doesn't flop around as much. They've got all kinds of trickery in the back of that thing to make it do what it does. And
you know why they can do that? Because they sell a whole ton of Cayennes and Macans and Panameras.
Yeah, but
they make a whole lot of money.
You don't have to do quite as much as that. You don't have to turn the engineering up to stun when, the engine is in the middle versus hanging out in the back axle.
That's true.
One thing that apparently having the rear engine configuration allows that makes the 911 a good race car is that you can brake harder later because the weight transfer is less extreme, which I thought was interesting. I don't know. I still like the rear engine thing because it's weird and it can get evil.
It's unique.
Yeah. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to afford a 911 anyway, so it's fine. I'll just.
Even used 911s are getting into ridiculous prices now. Even 912s are hitting ridiculous price points now.
I think the only 912 you could probably afford, sort of, would be like a 912E, and that's because it's that late 70s. It's a 1 year only car. It's a 76. The earlier 912s are the late 60s and early 70s, and those vintage 911s are so expensive that they're project cars. I don't know. I like the 911, but I sadly, I don't think I will ever be able to own one, which is okay. It's fine. I'll find.
You got to have something to strive for.
Yeah. So this week I was also driving a Ford vehicle, and I put a lot of miles on this one, and it's even a driver's car, or a driver-oriented vehicle. I can't say it's a car, but it's not for performance driving. So I had a Transit 350. With the mid-rise roof and, I don't know, all 14, 15 seats, something like that.
Was it the long wheelbase, long body?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So we had to do a trip for one of the kids had a competition sports thing, and it was in Atlantic City, which is a great place to take children. I'll put that out there for a week. So I was like, okay, I'm thinking like a week's worth of crap in the Jeep. Like, it's comfortable to drive, but that's a lot of luggage. And I was just like, whatever, I'll see what I can do. So I got this Transit 350, which was like the sort of like other end of the scale. Like, it was way too big for just the four of us, but whatever. It's good to drive. It's really good to drive.
Hey, everybody had their own row, and you had a couple to spare. Yeah,
I did. There were rows. I even took one pair of seats out of it. And it's not like I had stow and go. Like, the seat pairs are fairly heavy. I think it was probably 60, 70 pounds, maybe a little lighter, but it was a little heavy to move out of the Transit and just store it for the week. But that opened up a little bit more walking space, and it's just. For what this is, like, I feel like we talk about sport utility vehicles, and I think we need to rethink that, because people aren't using sport utility vehicles for, like, you know, off-roading. Like, that's sort of the implied sport in sport utility. But really what you do with a sport utility is you use the utility to get you to the sports that you then park the truck and get out. So like a four-wheel drive truck-based SUV is not a great fit, but a van is brilliant at it because it's just a box on wheels. And this one had it
is the ultimate in utility. It
was fantastic. And this is not like the old sort of E-Series or Econoline truck-based van that is, you know, it rides real bouncy and heavy and just, you know, those are only so comfortable and only so manageable. You knew that underneath it all, it was a truck. The Transit is really, really well behaved. It's really refined compared to those old style vans. So I was really impressed actually by how well thought out it is, how good it is. Ford clearly paid attention to what the people who spend hours a day in these things need. You know, the cup holders were all in the right spots, and, you know, had an armrest. The seats were pretty comfortable. You know, it had an air conditioner that would freeze you, which is good because it's a huge vehicle. There's a lot of volume to cool down. Had, you know, really well-placed controls, huge mirrors, giant windshield, excellent visibility. You know, easy to get in and out of. It wasn't too high off the ground, you know, and it rode and handled decently well. The long wheelbase, you know, you didn't want to get too wild with it, but it was really well behaved. So I'm impressed with this latest crop of vans, and I did make the mistake of forgetting that I was in a high roof van, and so I learned about a little bit of the history of New York parkways. And I knew this. So when I go to New York from Massachusetts, I generally wind up on the Sawmill River Parkway, which takes you down to like the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is a little north of the city. I think it's in like White Plains. So there's other routes to get there, but if you're on any of the New York parkways, they're some of the first parkways in the nation. And they were designed to have this really rustic look, and they do. And they were also, part of the rumor is that they were designed to exclude buses in a ploy to keep the
riffraff out of the city.
Well, the poorer folks out of the suburbs, actually, and I think that's really the story of the Southern State Parkway, which is not north of the city. That's Long Island, but it was inspired by these parkways. And so, like, the Southern State Parkway was designed by Robert Moses, and it actually has lower clearance bridges than the Sawmill or the Taconic, which sort of run parallel to each other. But anyway, the bridges are low, and I'm normally driving the parkway in a car. So I'm like, yeah, we'll get on the Sawmill. Signs everywhere, no commercial vehicles. Well, I'm not in a commercial vehicle.
Well, actually, you are.
Well, I mean, sort of. Yeah, so there were some bridges where it was like 13 feet clearance, 12 feet clearance, 11 feet. And I'm just like, you know what I failed to do is figure out how tall this thing is. So, yeah, we decided to get off and use the nav system, which, Ford nav is decently useful. And we
had Sync 3 in there?
No, it was this was an earlier version of Sync. So this may have actually been a slightly earlier model. It was just hanging around the fleet. But yeah, I think that the 18s have Sync 3. So even the earlier version of Sync, like, it's just still it's pretty good. I'm glad that it's in there, because sometimes commercial vehicles or vehicles that are like more utilitarian, they sort of miss out on that stuff. We took a tour of Chappaqua. We did not find Hillary, but we stayed on some surface streets until I could get back on the parkway after I had gone past the low bridge thing. Because apparently, like, vehicles that are too tall winding up on New York parkways is a thing. They even have like a landing page about it. It's like, hey, you should not do this, because like it causes huge traffic delays and it's very expensive for you. And if you like scalp your car, you're going to be in big trouble. So, yeah, I learned about that. And then on the way home, we took 684, which basically just goes the same route. It's designed for modern highway traffic. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the week with the transit. I think it's if you have a gaggle of people to move, obviously the long wheelbase one is excellent for that. It was really like it was a bus.
Yeah, I mean, and for those who are not familiar with metric, I believe a gaggle is 15. Is that correct?
It might not be full 15. It might be. I think, yeah, it's something like that.
I think the long wheelbase, long body is capable of 15.
I think that's probably right. I can't remember. I had my 10-year-old count the seats, so I'm not sure whether we have an accurate count or not. But it was close. It got like 18 miles to the gallon, maybe even higher.
For a vehicle, with the frontal area of a medium-sized barn, that's not too shabby. No,
and it has the EcoBoost V6, which is plenty of power. It'd do 100 miles an hour if you wanted it to. I did not, because the suspension is not really up to the task, although it has pretty fat sway bars, and it's it's well behaved. You just, you got a long vehicle, and you probably don't want to fool around with it, because once you break it loose, you're not going to get it back. So yeah,
there's a little bit of inertia there.
Yeah, it's pretty good fuel economy for a vehicle that big, and that was like combined driving. So it's like 17 to 18 mixed driving. You could probably keep it right around 20 if it were a highway only thing. That's really efficient. And so I was looking at the EcoBoost in this installation. That is an engine with serious potential. And we've seen some of that potential realized in other vehicles, but man, it's corked up here. It's, tiny intake runners, tiny turbos, so there's, you move more air through that EcoBoost V6. It's going to make a lot more power. So,
what is it, about 365 in the Transit?
Yeah, something like that. I was impressed with it.
You have that same, or a variant of that 3.5 liter EcoBoost in the Ford GT,
right,
producing 650 horsepower.
Right. I bet it has a lot larger plumbing.
A little.
Yeah. But it's a really responsive engine. It's not like the old modular V8s that they make decent power on paper, but you got to wind them up for it. And so that would make the vans and the trucks feel a bit sluggish and very thirsty. This was pretty responsive, had torque right off the line. And no problem, pulling away from toll booths, merging to traffic. It had plenty of power. But the best feature of all was because we wound up in Atlantic City, which is not my favorite place. And it turns out when you wind up in Atlantic City with a vehicle too tall to park in a garage yourself, you have to valet it all week. But at a certain point, you want to stop putting yourself in a situation where you have to tip people. So, like when you want to put luggage on and off a vehicle in Atlantic City, it's another racket. Like you're not allowed to touch the luggage trolley cart thing. You have to have the guy come and do that for you so you can tip him. It's a racket. With a Ford vehicle, even if the valet has your key, you can look for the little card that's in the owner's manual that gives you the access code on that antique keypad that's on there. And then you can go find the car in the lot, and you can just use the access code to unlock the car, put the stuff you need to put in it, lock it back up, and do that multiple times so you can save yourself money. That's my little cheapskate dad trick.
Excellent.
I mean, that feature, I have it on my own car. I've never used it. And like, I just had this light dawn on my head that week, and it was like the best thing ever. I've realized like, oh, we can get into this thing without the key. Like perfect. So, yeah, we should move on.
As long as you can find out where it's parked.
Yeah. Well, and it's so big, they had to put it in the oversized lot that was, right in front of the casino, not too far. So,
At least with that thing, you probably didn't have to worry about them going around joyriding in the thing.
No, I kind of wanted to like actually charge people for rides down to the boardwalk, but then I realized that the sort of privatized public transportation that's in that town probably would not take kindly to that, and I decided not to do that. I thought you
didn't want to get your legs broken?
No, but I thought we could make a few extra bucks. I mean, we had a 15-passenger van. I could undercut the sort of entrenched. I could pull an Uber, right? I could just charge people much cheaper rates for rides. And when I had
just slap a sign on the side that says Chariot, and just say, hey, you're with Ford.
I wanted to come home alive. So yeah, anyway, we should just move on now to the actual podcast. I've geeked out quite enough.
All right.
So yeah, our first topic is, well, you went to Argo. Why don't we talk about that? You went to you went to Argo, and you're gonna your impressions will be elsewhere, and yeah. So how?
Yeah. So our Argo AI, for those that haven't been paying attention, is a company that started. It was formed in late November of 2016. A couple months later, Ford announced that they were investing up to $1 billion in it to take a majority stake. It was founded by a guy named Brian Selesky and his co-founder Pete Radner. Brian, back in the DARPA Urban Challenge days of 2007, when the team from Carnegie Mellon University with support from GM won the DARPA Urban Challenge, for autonomous vehicles. That team was led by Chris Urmson and Brian Selesky. Chris led the hardware development side, putting all the sensors and everything together, and Brian led the software development. And then we had an interview with Brian that I did last summer when I first met him in San Francisco back in August of 2017. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But had a chance, ever since they set up shop in Pittsburgh, they've been growing. At the time that Ford made their investment, Argo had about 6 people. They have 338 people now. And so even though Ford owns a majority stake, Argo has been given responsibility for developing the production version of the automated driving system for Ford that they're going to launch in 2021. So they're putting together the sensor stack, the compute platform, and all the software, and then working with Ford to integrate all of that into the vehicle that Ford is developing. And I got the chance to spend most of the day with Brian and Pete and VP of Robotics, Brett Browning, learning about how they're doing their system. And one of the big things that they really focused on in the conversation was the emphasis on safety. Really trying. They're really focused on making sure that their system is going to be safe and robust. Doing a lot of testing. They've built a lot of their own tools in house for doing mapping. Building out HD maps, and they're currently testing their fleet of autonomous fusions. They've got a couple dozen in Pittsburgh. They've got more in Dearborn, and then a third fleet down in Miami, where Ford announced a few months ago that they're starting to test in Miami. And so they've been doing the mapping in Miami, and they've started doing the autonomous mode testing down there, and they're going to be working with Lyft, and they've already been doing some stuff with Domino's down there, and also bringing in Postmates, and working with all those different partners to figure out how they're going to develop business models to actually try and make money from these vehicles, because that's something that nobody has really figured out yet is the money making part.
What they should do is they should stop all the autonomous development and just buy up parcels to make into parking lots. and
for the foreseeable future, that would probably be more profitable.
Yeah. Are they like the last man standing in Pittsburgh? Everybody else is kind of left, right?
Uber's still there. And I actually reached out to Uber when I was making my plans to go to Pittsburgh. And they said they're not quite ready to start talking yet about what they're doing. In fact, while I was down there, Uber announced that they were laying off all of their vehicle operators. They had already laid off everybody in Phoenix after the crash a few months ago, and they were now laying off about 100 people that were still left in Pittsburgh and in San Francisco. So these are the safety drivers, and they're going to start rehiring, and they're now calling them mission specialists instead of vehicle operators. And they're going to go through a much more intensive training program. And this is one of the things that the Argo guys showed me. They took me over to the depot, which is a couple blocks away from their new office, where they keep the cars, and told me all about the training process. When they bring in new vehicle operators, they go through a 3-phase training process where they first spend time, just driving around in a conventional vehicle, getting used to how all the things work, and learning some of the procedures, and then they go into testing on a closed course, driving around on a closed course in the automated vehicles. And then the third phase is, some more evaluation before they're allowed to actually go and actually start operating these vehicles during testing. And one of the interesting things they do is, Uber was the only company that was having safety driver, just a single safety driver in their car. Everybody else has two. They have one to actually monitor to be the operator to take over in case of a problem, and the other, is the one who's looking at the data. And one of the things that Argo is doing is they're actually they swap partners every day on a daily basis. So they're running 2 shifts a day. So every day you're driving with somebody different. And the goal, a couple of goals for that. One is, you don't try not to get too bored, talking to the same person every day as you're cruising around Pittsburgh or Miami or Michigan and Dearborn, but also to try to reduce complacency. So that basically everybody's trying to keep each other on their toes, and making sure everybody's still paying attention to what's going on in the vehicle. That's something that was a big part of the problem with the Uber crash, is that nobody was really monitoring the vehicle operator to make sure that she was paying attention, and that's so she wasn't ready to take over when the vehicle failed to do what it was supposed to do. I can't talk yet about the impressions of the ride I took with the vehicle. But in terms of the engineering work that Argo's doing, they seem to be pretty thorough. One of the interesting things that they've done that seems to be a little different, it's like most automated driving systems, you've got basically three components in there. You've got the perception system, which is where all the sensor data comes in, and it tries to classify what the sensors are seeing around the vehicle. And then you have the path planning system, which decides where's the vehicle going to go. And then the actuation system that actually, makes it stop, go, and steer. And, one of the things that one of the components that Argo's got in here between perception and path planning is the prediction engine. So, it's looking at, once it's classified all the objects around the vehicle, pedestrians, other vehicles, whatever, it's running prediction models on where it thinks those objects are going to go, and then feeding that into the path planning, to try to determine where the vehicle should go in response to all that. Well, for that prediction engine, one of the things they've done is they've incorporated game theory into that. And, some of the people that they hired to work on that component they hired a bunch of people from Disney, who work with ESPN, that program systems for the cameras following sports, when you're doing sports coverage.
Yeah.
They want to know, they want to know where the cameras need to be looking, what path do the cameras need to be taking, looking at all the players and figuring out where they're likely to go and making sure that the cameras can follow them automatically. Yeah,
definitely like the guys who do hockey, because I can't ever see the puck.
Hockey, basketball, soccer is another one.
Yeah.
So that I thought that was kind of interesting, having these game theory guys as part of the team. So they're not people that are traditionally working on automated vehicle systems, but it's an important component of this that can hopefully make the system more safer and more reliable.
Well, and so like that kind of prediction engine kind of thing is what everybody does to a certain degree. They do it, I guess, in different ways.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to be able to project where the other road users are going to go. But I think that, at least from what I've seen, this is the first one that's using some of this game theory stuff.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to say, like, that's their sort of like their differentiator, right? Is the way they do it, and those differences are going to sort of sort out the winners from the losers, or I don't want to put it in those terms, but you know what I mean? Like those are going to be the real like differentiators about who gets to market, who has a system that's reliable and offers solid, stable performance on a regular basis.
Yeah. And, another aspect of what they're doing is just kind of the way their whole software system is architected. You talk to some of the companies that are doing this stuff, and everybody's using, machine learning techniques to some degree. And one of the, machine learning is really cool in that, you can put together this model and then feed it a bunch of data and train the model, to be able to recognize different types of objects and understand what they are. The problem is once you've done that, it's hard to know it's not like traditional software where you can look into it and understand exactly what it's doing, because as it's training, it's making connections and it's changing things. It's changing itself around. So, the idea is trying to replicate, the synapses in the brain, what happens in the human brain, in a neural network. And so, actually trying to validate that the software is doing the right, the software is always going to do the right things is actually much more challenging. And so some companies are, basically creating a giant, monolithic neural network system that, it basically makes the whole thing a big black box, which may be fine. But the problem is it's going to be very hard to prove what it's going to do in any particular situation without just testing it. You can't do, much other kinds of analysis on it. And so what they're doing is they're breaking their system up into smaller chunks, what they call a modular decomposition. And they're certainly not the first to do that, but by breaking it up into smaller chunks, they're using neural nets where it makes sense, and also using more traditional software approaches in other areas where it makes sense, trying to use the right tool for the job. And they can, unit test all these different pieces and hopefully have a more reliable system coming out the other end.
That's a really interesting approach. Yeah. I can see why Ford would invest in these guys to do it too, versus like trying to bake that all in-house, which, I'm sure they're also working on their own internal efforts at the same time to a degree too.
Yeah, well, what happened was when they did the investment into Argo, a few dozen people that were working on the project internally at Ford went over to Argo and are working at Argo, but the autonomous driving effort that they were doing at Ford was more of a research type of system. It wasn't really designed as a production intent system. And so what they did was they handed off what they've done to Argo. Argo, has redone a lot of it, to make it more robust for a production system. And the Ford guys back in Dearborn are continuing future development work, down on the path that they were on, researching new techniques, new ways to do this.
I still come back to the fact that they kind of need two drivers or two people in the car to just keep each other on their toes. I don't know that we're ever going to get past that. So it's again, we're in that space between like assisted driving and full autonomy, and what applications we find for that. So, like, I have no doubt that they're going to make the technology actually work. And then it's like, what do we do with it?
Well, a bunch of companies seem to think that they're pretty close to doing it without human operators in there. Waymo plans to start doing theirs by the end of this year, and GM plans to launch their automated mobility service sometime first part of 2019. In fact, there was a report that came out last week, I think, from Bloomberg, and got some pictures of it that GM installed 18 DC fast chargers in a parking garage in the Embarcadero area of San Francisco to support their autonomous fleet, so that the cars, when they need a charge, they can come in, get plugged in, get recharged quickly, and get back on the road again. And this is one of the things that Ford is doing differently. They decided that rather than go the battery electric route for their first generation and rely on DC fast charging, which can degrade the battery over time, they're going with a hybrid for their first vehicle. And Waymo is kind of splitting the difference. They're doing a plug-in hybrid first with the Pacifica hybrid, and then also bringing on the Jaguar I-Pace for their premium service, which is a battery electric.
Yeah, well, and that makes a lot of sense. We've talked about how they really do need the hybrid or EV architecture for, enough power to run the sensors. And it just makes it easier to also sort of automate the driving to a degree. So that doesn't surprise me. And honestly, I think that the hybrid is probably like a quicker route to get from here to being in service, and having less time on the charger. We know how long it takes to fill up with gasoline, and that car can sort of constantly be running with very short breaks to refuel. And while we all want to see that electric future, I think the hybrid is probably a smarter approach at this point. So
I would tend to agree.
And eventually we'll all have EVs and we'll all live in little utopian pods, and it will be marvelous.
No, it'll never be a utopia. We're all doomed.
All right. Well, same with the "we're all going to die" thing.
We are all going to die eventually.
Yes,
but
absolutely. Right now,
fortunately, I'm closer to it than you are.
Well,
so.
you never know. You never know. So let's see.
So I can just enjoy what's left.
Yeah. Every second that ticks away, we're 1 second closer.
Yep.
Sorry. In the meantime, though, speaking of like virtual utopia, Goodwood just happened. And
no, that's a real utopia.
Yeah. I mean, okay. There was a self-driving car there. Kinda.
Yeah, but who cares?
Actually, there were a couple.
There was actually a couple of self-driving cars, or sort of self-driving. One was sort of self-driving. The other was truly self-driving. So Goodwood Festival of Speed is an annual event that occurs, which is it's something I definitely have to get to one of these years.
So there's a few things I want to go to. Goodwood is one of them. Lemons race is another. I would love to participate in a lemons race, but that's a different story. Speaking of being close to death.
Hey, all you need is a $500 car.
Right. And a couple thousand in safety equipment.
Details.
Yeah. And Radwood, which is a newer thing that has not come to the East Coast. And I didn't realize how much work they actually put in to putting on those Radwood shows, which if you haven't heard of Radwood, it's kind of like cars of the just 80s and 90s and, a celebration of that culture, if you will. So I was pestering them for a while, like, do one on the East Coast. And then they explained, like, yeah, okay, fine. But Jake, unless you're going to help, stop bugging us. Like, we'll get there. It's a lot of work and you don't fully appreciate how much work it is. So once I realized how much work it is, now I fully appreciate it. But anyway, Goodwood is high on that list of things to go to. Cause it's, you're just driving up the Earl's driveway, right? It's the Earl of March.
Pretty much. Right? Yeah. Or the Duke, the Lord of March.
Lord of March. Oh, pardon me.
Yeah. Lord March.
Didn't mean to demote him. He's just got this awesome driveway, and they just drive bonkers stuff up it for like, I don't know, a week?
3 days.
3 days?
Yeah, 3 days, yeah. So, yeah, it's at Goodwood House in Sussex in England. This year was the 25th anniversary, and people and companies bring all kinds of fascinating stuff. The hill climb itself, it's a 1.1 mile course, lined by hay bales, up basically, as you said, up the driveway towards the manor house. And the all-time record was set in 1999 by Nick Heidfeld in a McLaren F1 car. That is a Formula One car, not a McLaren F1.
I was to say McLaren F1 sort of like.
I mean, they've had McLaren F1s doing it, doing the climb, but this was in an MP413. He did it in 41.6 seconds.
That's so fast.
Yeah, it's crazy fast. Sebastian Buemi has done it in a Red Bull F1 car. So I mean, there's been a bunch of F1s, and all kinds of classic and more modern vehicles. Every year they honor a different mark. So it's kind of like at Pebble Beach, where they have a different honored brand every year. And this year it was Porsche for their 70th anniversary. And they create this amazing sculpture on the grounds.
Oh, yeah.
It's usually goes up well up into the air, with some of the cars from the Honored brand, up in the air above everything. A couple years ago, they had Mazda, and they had the 787B that won Le Mans in 1991 with a 4-rotor Wankel, up on this giant pedestal. So it's pretty amazing. This year, among the cars that were on hand, Porsche brought the 919 Evo, which is the P1, the hybrid P1 car that won Le Mans the last 3 years, and just a few weeks ago broke the all-time lap record at the Nordschleife, the North Loop of the Nürburgring. Broke a 35-year-old record. This thing makes like 1,000 horsepower and ran around the Nürburgring in like how much? It was like crazy fast.
It was. I remember. It was
6 minutes and I can't remember now. Lost it. But anyway, they did not go. Porsche was approached to make a run with it. They opted not to because they said that their goal was not necessarily to break every single record, but rather just at some selected tracks. And so they went to the Nürburgring, they went to Spa in Belgium, and they're going to a few other tracks. But they did some demonstration runs, before the actual timed runs happened. So there's no official time for Porsche for the 919, but it's this thing is a wickedly fast car. I'm sure that if they had decided to run this, it would have easily broken that 41.6 record. But another car from the VW group did run and did quite well. It was the IDR that smashed the Pikes Peak record a few weeks back.
Yeah, and
it ran a 43.6 time up the hill. As an electric race car, and then, as you said, a couple of autonomous cars, or at least one was autonomous. The other was not quite as autonomous as it needed to be, which was Siemens put together a 1965 Mustang with a self-driving system, or what was supposed to be a self-driving system that didn't actually work so well. Apparently, I guess it was guided primarily by by GPS, and they had problems with the GPS signals. There's a lot of trees around the Goodwood course, and so it was having problems with the GPS signals and some other sensor issues, and so it was kind of slowly meandering up the hill. The driver was constantly had to correct the steering, so it was not good. But the other one that did make it up was the Robo Race prototype, which is this prototype race car, autonomous race car that's being developed for this new Robo Race series. I can't find an actual time that it's set, so I don't know if it set an official time or just did a demonstration run.
Yeah, Jalopnik says it was its lap wasn't half as fast as some of the cars that made the drive. So
they did say they limited its speed to 75 miles an hour because it was the first time they were doing it.
So I don't understand autonomous racing.
Neither do I. I have as my job, I'm interested, and as an engineer at heart, I'm interested in autonomous driving technology. But as a racing fan, I have zero interest in watching autonomous race cars.
It's like watching Roombas fight it out. Like, no, I don't care. I want to. I don't know. And that's one of the coolest things about Goodwood is that it's one of the few places that you're ever going to see so much of this just amazing stuff from supercars to even the autonomous, like highest tech cutting edge stuff to like
or a guy in a Range Rover Sport, setting a new record on two wheels,
right.
2 minutes and 24.5 seconds.
Well, I think there's that, and then there's just there's the old amazing stuff that you never get to see driven in anger, like the Beast of Turin was there. I mean, just, that thing will blow your mind.
The original Bullet Mustang.
Yeah, raced against the new Bullet too, didn't it? Or did they?
I don't think it raced. They don't. I mean, they race one at a time, so they don't race head to head. They race against the clock.
Right. That's what I meant.
And so they made a run in each of those Mustangs.
They probably weren't working the original one, like, to the edge of its envelope, given its sort of importance, I guess, in the legend.
Yeah, and I doubt it.
But either way, like, you never, like, you'll maybe, like, if you go to something like a Concours event or like Pebble Beach or whatever, you'll see them drive by, and so you get to see them moving under their own power, but you don't get to see them driven like you get to see them driven at Goodwood, unless you're
there. I mean, one of the few places where you'll see, there's a few places where you can see these classic cars running hard. One is actually at Pebble Beach. They have an event, or during Pebble Beach week, they have the vintage races on the Saturday at Laguna Seca, which is just down the road from Pebble Beach. And then, of course, there's the Le Mans Classic, which was, I think, last week or the week before, which is run every 2 years, and they have a bunch of shorter races for classic Le Mans, prior Le Mans cars, and some going back, to the 1930s and 1930s and 40s, but also newer ones, like Porsche 956s and Group 5 cars from the 70s and all kinds of amazing stuff. But I mean, Goodwood is quite unique though in the mix of different vehicles that you'll see there.
So it should be at the top of everybody's list.
Absolutely. If you're into cool cars, this is definitely the place to go.
All right. I wanted to come back to Volkswagen for a moment because they talked about the IDR. The ID Cross and the Buzz are coming, according to rumors.
No, they're definitely coming. I mean, they've previously announced that they've got VW is going to have a whole range of ID branded battery electric vehicles.
Yeah, the thing that's throwing me off is that, like, our source link here is an autocar story, and sometimes I just get the feeling that they just make stuff up. They're just like throwing things at the dartboard and like, yeah, eventually, you know what? Make it a 5-year prediction 5 years from now, and then anything could happen. And we could just be like, yeah, whoops, that didn't happen. But yeah, they're coming to the U.S. They're going to be built here. Which is interesting.
Well, VW again had previously announced that both. So that right now they've shown 3 different ID concepts. They had the hatchback, which is a Golf-sized battery EV. But it's not based on the Golf platform. So all these are based off their new modular electric platform. So the ID hatchback is going to be the first one launching next year. And then in like middle of the year, I think. And then the latter part of the year or early 2020 is the ID Cross. And that's going to be the first one that's coming to the U.S. market. And that's a crossover. And they showed that one last year at the LA Auto Show. I think they actually debuted it in Shanghai last year and then brought it to LA. And then the ID Buzz, which we saw last year here at the Detroit Auto Show, which is the minivan, inspired by the original microbus. And so the Autocar report says, they were talking to the new head of VW of America, and that the ID Cross and the Buzz will both actually be assembled here in the U.S. For the North American market. So probably built in Chattanooga. Since Chattanooga is not running anywhere near its capacity anyway, they'll make those vehicles probably in Chattanooga.
Do the tariffs that have been enacted have any sort of effect on that?
I'm sure that couldn't have any impact on their decision making. It probably does have an impact, somewhat of an impact. I'm sure that they considered that. But there's also just the cost of transportation of these vehicles. If you can make them locally, that would be that would be the preferred method. I think when it comes to battery electric vehicles in particular, I think if you can avoid shipping them overseas with those big batteries in there, they would prefer to do that. So I think that's probably another factor that came into this as well. And just like I said, the fact that they have available capacity at the Chattanooga plant, because the Passat's not doing that great. The Atlas is doing fine, but there's still plenty of room to add more product in there.
Yeah, are these the right products to use that capacity? I guess would be my question. The Buzz is cool.
The Buzz will probably be lower volume. It's the crossover, the Cross is the one that's probably going to be the highest volume of the three.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. I'd like to see the production versions too. Like what I've seen, and again, I'm just sort of thinking about the Buzz most specifically was, a very show car kind of presentation. So, interior controls that are really slick, but definitely not production car stuff. So I want to see how it makes that transition. And because Volkswagen usually does a pretty good job of ergonomics and making this stuff work well for drivers. So I'd like to see how that works out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially the Buzz, like you said, that one's got kind of the most far out interior design. It's the most concepty of the three. And I think that, the other thing is I think the Buzz will also probably be the basis for, any autonomous vehicle that they launch here for mobility services.
Well, it's a van.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, and there's also the rumor that they're going to bring the Beetle back to use the same sort of underpinnings. And Volkswagen's really good at this too. Like the MEB, right? Their electric platform uses a lot of MQB stuff as well.
No, not really. No, the MEB is more of a skateboard design.
Oh, okay.
So it's more, like what Tesla and actually, GM was actually they actually created this skateboard concept. So basically you have a big battery, and the suspension and motors attached to either end of it, so a big fat battery pack down the bottom of the car. And then everything attached at the ends of it. And then you can just drop different top hats on it.
It's a good concept. It's been around for a very long time, and Tesla has been successful with it. So, and
sort of.
Yeah, that's true. But we're not going to talk about Tesla.
That's right.
Not going to do it. So yeah, electric cars are coming, whether they're autonomous or not. Like I feel like we're at that critical mass where they really have gotten a lot more practical to own and use and be adopted. So I don't see them going away anytime soon.
No, definitely not. If nothing else, regulations will keep them around for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, maybe. As long as we have some.
You still have California.
That's true.
California and 9 other states, and possibly 10 soon. Colorado is also looking at adopting the California emission standards and the ZEV mandate. So
yeah, we have that stuff. I don't know about the ZEV mandate, but we have the emissions here in Massachusetts, and I think all of New England now has California emissions. So
yeah, I think Connecticut and New York have the ZEV mandate. I don't think the other states north of that do though. So all right. Next up, Hyundai. A couple of new cars, new models that have recently joined the lineup. You can buy them now. They've been doing some drives around. I actually drove them. It's been about a month, a little more than a month since I actually drove them here in Detroit, and we just haven't gotten around to talking about them. The new Kona and the second generation Veloster. The Kona is their small crossover. Below the Tucson, and it's pretty cool. I like the Kona a lot. it's kind of funky looking, not quite as hard on the eyes as like a Nissan Juke.
Yeah.
But it's got a nice size to it. If you're looking for a small crossover, definitely if you go down that path, I would definitely recommend getting the 1.6 liter turbo instead of the 2 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. It's a lovely little engine. In the Kona, it's about 175 horsepower, and it moves it along quite nicely.
Yeah, well, and they call the styling, and it's interesting to see like with the Kona, they followed a little bit of a trend that was sort of set out by the Cherokee, the Jeep Cherokee, the KL Cherokee, that had the parking lights sort of up where the headlights might be, and then the headlights were located lower. The Kona kind of does that as well, but I think it does it actually more successfully than the Cherokee did, or maybe that we're just a little bit more used to it now. And now that the Cherokee has gone back to a more traditional headlight, it's different. It's a look, and I think that in this end of the segment, compact crossover, like a B segment car, like that's a lot of different buyers, and it's not a very expensive segment generally. So one of the ways you stand out is by sort of unique style, and the Kona certainly has it. They call it a urban smart armor exterior, which whatever,
which is it's a one of their goofy marketing terms that they come up with to describe what they're doing.
Somebody toiled like an entire afternoon to come up with those 3 words.
Oh, they probably spent a month coming up with that. I mean, you work in advertising, you know what that nonsense is like.
Yeah, I work at a small agency, so for me it would be an afternoon. I'd come up with a few, and then generally, like, I'd present 3 or 4, and then we'd take like one from each collection of words. Anyway, I mean, it's different looking, and it's not that small. I'm trying to think about, like, in terms of size, what it's roughly sort of size.
It's pretty comparable to like the EcoSport, and maybe a little bit smaller than the Honda HR-V. Mazda CX-3 size. It's in that same basic size class. The rear seat, is definitely a little is tighter than the HR-V. But it's not bad. It's not terrible. I mean, a couple of adults could fit back there. You won't be as comfortable as in the Honda, but you can manage as long as the front passengers are willing to give you a little bit of leeway. The overall ergonomics are pretty good. The powertrain is really nice. It drives well. No real complaints about that.
Well, the powertrain was interesting too, because like you talked about the turbo, which is great. I've enjoyed that engine in other Hyundai vehicles that I've driven it in. The base engine is a Atkinson cycle.
Yeah,
but it's not,
which is unusual,
right,
because it's not a hybrid,
right? And generally, the Atkinson cycle engine is paired with the hybrid for no sort of loss of performance. When you have it on its own, it's not that the performance is bad, but it's less than. I mean,
the thing about the Atkinson cycle, for those that don't know, the Atkinson cycle. It's one of the 4-stroke combustion cycles, and basically you keep the intake valves open longer, so you have a shorter compression stroke effectively than you do the power stroke. So it gets more work out of the fuel, but what happens is you give up quite a bit of torque, and so Atkinson cycle engines are usually they're usually combined with something else. In most cases, they're combined with a hybrid system. So, because the electric motor in the hybrid gives you instant torque right off from 0 RPM, it kind of fills in that low end torque hole that you get with an Atkinson engine. And so, it works out fine. The other way that it sometimes gets done is to add a supercharger to it.
Miller cycle.
And that becomes a Miller cycle. So an Atkinson with a supercharger is a Miller cycle. Yeah. And so that gives you that low end torque that you're losing from the Atkinson. it's fine, it's efficient, but it's not as much fun to drive. The 1.6 turbo, is nearly as efficient, but you get 175 horsepower and 195 foot-pounds of torque, and that comes from 1,500 RPM. So it's a more enjoyable drive, and if you look at the fuel economy, the 2-liter Atkinson engine is rated at 25 city and 30 highway. The 1.6 turbo is 26 city and 29 highway. So they're virtually the same.
Yeah. On the sticker, I wonder what that winds up being. In
real world, you'll probably get a couple miles per gallon less. It depends on how you drive it. If you drive it aggressively, you're going to get lower fuel economy. But the same thing is also going to be true of the Atkinson. And because the Atkinson is so short on torque at the low end, you're going to be more inclined probably to stomp on it, in the hopes that something might happen, as opposed to, the turbo, is more responsive. So in most driving, especially, in most city driving, you don't really have to get into it that hard, to get good drivability out of it.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So you drove it with the turbo and their dual clutch transmission, right? Like that.
Yep. Yeah, the 6-speed or 7-speed dual clutch, which is a very nice transmission. It's probably, I'd say it's probably the best DCT out there in any mainstream vehicles.
Huh? When I can understand against like sort of like Ford Power Shift, but Volkswagen DSG.
I think it's better than the DSG. I think it's smoother and better launch performance than the DSG. The DSGs are good, but they're a little bit sluggish right off the line. And I've always felt like these Hyundai DCTs just felt a little more responsive right off the line.
Huh. All right.
That's just my opinion.
No, I haven't. I don't think I've driven a Hyundai with the DCT, at least that I can recall. So I will have to defer to your judgment, Sam.
That's always a wise decision.
It probably is. That turbo engine that we talked about is also what motivates the new Veloster, right?
Yeah, the second generation Veloster, will look instantly familiar to anybody who's seen the first generation. It's still got that kind of funky layout, 3-door layout, with an extra door on the passenger side. So it's a little sport coupe hatchback thing with 2 doors on the passenger side, 1 on the driver's side. And one of the interesting things that came up in the conversation when we were talking with the Hyundai product planners about it, somebody asked, if they would ever consider doing a 4-door version of it, and they said, yeah, we could certainly do it. We have the stampings to do it both ways, because for right-hand drive markets like Japan and Australia and the UK, they build it the opposite way around, so the single door is on the right-hand side of the car, and the double doors are on the left.
They didn't just cop out like Mini did with the Clubman.
Yeah. So, they if they ever felt the need to, they could do a 4-door version. They could just put the UK passenger side on the driver's side on the US car if they had that need, but they don't really see a need to do that, because the back seats are really pretty much occasional seats anyway. It's a fairly small car. But it's a lot of fun to drive. It's the same platform as what you get with the Elantra GT Sport, with the multi-link rear suspension. So one of the complaints about the original Veloster, was kind of the ride and handling was not great because it had that twist beam rear axle. And so now, if you get the 1.6 turbo, you get the multi-link rear suspension. which is a much nicer setup. And this thing is quite nimble, quite quick. It's got the 1.6, but in this one it's rated at 201 horsepower, which is the same as the Elantra GT Sport, and the sportier Kias that also have this. So this 1.6 turbo, basically comes in those two configurations depending on which vehicle it's in, either the 175 or the 201 horsepower. And it's you can get it with the DCT or with a 6-speed manual transmission, and it's a lot of fun to drive.
So, I mean, it's definitely an improvement over the last Veloster in looks, and it sounds like chassis wise it is too. How's they're making a little bit of hay about their torque vectoring stuff, which I don't think has been a thing in earlier Velosters. How did that sort of feel during your drive, or was it noticeable?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't, where the drive route went, we didn't really have a whole lot of opportunity to really,
you didn't drive it like an animal? You didn't fill up on their lunch and then just go try to crash the car into a tree?
No.
What kind of a journalist are you?
Apparently not a very good one.
Yeah, because I just torque vectoring is a thing that often makes me excited. It sounds like they're using the brake hardware to do it.
Yeah, it is using the brake hardware. So getting a little bit of when you're cornering, going into a corner, applying a little bit of brake to the inside front wheel to help it turn in. To put a little bit more yaw moment on the car. I mean. Like I said, I didn't really have an opportunity to push it that hard to really exercise it. But it works fine in other similar applications. So I would expect it to be fine here. It does, the cockpit, is set up a little bit different from, like the Elantra and some of the other ones. So, the center stack is all kind of tilted more towards the driver, so it still has the display sitting up on top, tablet style, but then it's tilted towards the driver, to give you better access to the controls. And, most of the rest of it will feel fairly familiar, and it's a fun little coupe and, quite reasonably priced.
So how do you think it stacks up between, say, like the GTI and the Civic SI, I guess? It's I've heard chatter on social media that this could actually be preferable.
Yeah, I think the GTI is a little more powerful and more expensive. So I think that. Without driving them back to back, it's hard to say. I think, this is definitely a much better car than the original Veloster. I think when I have a chance to spend more time with it, I'll be able to give you a better idea. But I mean, the GTI is definitely, regardless of what Casey thinks about the Golf R, is absolutely the best version of the Golf.
Casey's not the only one who's wrong.
Yeah, I know. I think it could, I think, in terms of performance, drivability, it's probably pretty close to the Golf. Where the Golf has an advantage, where the GTI has an advantage is just in terms of practicality. It's a little bigger, the back seat is more usable than the back seat in the Veloster. This is more pure sports coupe, for somebody that, is driving either alone or with one passenger most of the time, as opposed to, somebody that might have a small kid, putting a small kid into a car seat in the back of the Veloster would definitely be more challenging than doing the same thing in a GTI. Yeah.
But you know what? Nothing that's easy is, I don't know. I was going to say is worth doing, but that's not true. Some things are very easy to do and they're totally worth it. So, so let's just move on.
And well, the other thing too, you asked about the Civic Si. I think the advantage that I think this has over the Civic Si is that it's a hatchback. The Si is only available as a sedan or a coupe. And I think for a small car, a hatchback is always a better option. So, because you have that big opening in the back, if you need to, this is for the person that's going to own a vehicle like this, it's probably going to be their main vehicle or their only vehicle. So it's going to more likely to be a daily driver, as opposed to something you drive on the weekends or just a toy. And, having the flexibility to do other stuff with it, to make your IKEA runs or, even just to, carry your groceries, having a hatchback, I think is a better option. The Civic, you can get the Sport, and the hatchback with the Sport trim, but that's only 180 horsepower. So you've got 20 more horsepower with this one than you do with the Civic Sport hatchback. So, you've got to make if you want to go Civic, and I love the Civic, you've got to make a little bit of a trade-off. Plus, the Civic, the Civic is more practical in other respects. So, it does have a more usable back seat, than this thing does. So, it's kind of like, take a look at it, see which one you like better.
Yeah. We are embarrassed for choice. Imagine that.
Yeah, that's never a bad thing,
especially in that segment. All right, questions. We had a question.
We did have a question. Let me find it here and go to the inbox so I can actually read it instead of reading it out of the Google Sheet. Is that the right one? No, that's not the right one. Never mind that. Let's go here. Okay, in episode 72, it says we touched on how the small compact crossovers are both interior and exterior. It makes me wonder what's the difference between a crossover and a station wagon. At first, I thought it might be the availability of all-wheel drive, but then I thought about the CTS wagon that had that, and that was called a wagon. Then I thought it might be the appearance of an off-roader, but then remembered the Spark Active and the Fiesta Active. So this is someone from I think from Europe, Jeremy from Europe, because those particular models aren't sold here.
Right.
So what makes a vehicle truly a crossover and not just a four-door hatchback? Hatch is not a door. You don't use it to enter or exit the vehicle. Could it just be the fact that Americans don't like the term wagon for some reason? Would you call these vehicles estates? Yes, essentially, a hatchback is or rather a crossover is whatever a manufacturer decides to call a crossover. If you look at GM, they call the Chevy Bolt a crossover. It's not a crossover. It's a 5-door hatchback.
It's a hatchback.
Yeah,
it's like
nominally a crossover. There's no hard and fast definition. Basically, something that sits a little bit higher, has a slightly higher hip point than a conventional car. So, getting in and out, you don't have to drop down into the seat as much, as you just kind of slide across. Beyond that, a lot of crossovers, have some cues that kind of, give them a little bit of an off-road look, but, increasingly a lot of them don't either. You look at something like the HRV or the Kona, or the Toyota CHR, and those certainly don't look like crossover or like off-roaders. So, I think it's basically just, if it sits a little bit higher, and the other thing about station wagons versus a crossover, crossovers are, if crossovers didn't exist, station wagons would probably be the cars that those people would buy. So functionally they're similar. Station wagons tend to be a little bit longer in the back. You tend to have a slightly longer, cargo area, behind the rear seats versus a hatchback version. So, think of, the Golf, hatchback versus the Golf station wagon, the Golf Sport Wagon, which was formerly the Jetta Sport Wagon. They're the same car, but, with a couple extra inches on the back, and I kind of like, we talked a few months back about Jason Torchinsky's definition of a station wagon versus a hatchback. Basically, if the rear glass extends forward of the center line of the rear axle, it's a hatchback, or maybe it was the roof. If the end of the roof line comes ahead of the rear axle, then it's a hatchback. Otherwise, it's a station wagon.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these things are whatever they call them.
Yeah,
like,
well, that's what I said. I mean, it's whatever they decide to call a crossover is a crossover.
The funniest thing is to occasionally look at the EPA classification for the vehicle. Like, I remember probably the sort of easiest one to recall is the Chrysler PT Cruiser was actually classified by the EPA as a truck.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't really, so I'm not sure how they managed to get that one passed. But
because you could drop the seats out, and I think they offered a version that a cargo version that didn't have a rear seat or something.
Okay. Sure. What I mean, it did have that. It had that beam axle in the back, so it could have a flat load floor. Fine, I'll buy it. Like, a lot of this.
Well, even today, with utilities, they're, for cars, you've got small, medium, large cars, for the EPA classifications, and then there's light trucks, and then for SUVs, they've got two classes of SUVs. There's what they call standard SUVs and small SUVs, and for the standard SUVs, they all count as light trucks. But for small SUVs, they made an arbitrary decision that small SUVs with four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive will be classed with light trucks, and two-wheel drive small SUVs will be classed as cars. It would be grouped in with cars when they're doing their CAFE calculations. So guess if you look at the Nissan Pathfinder, that's a fairly big 3-row crossover. Guess what that is?
The Pathfinder?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna say that's a light truck.
No, only the all-wheel drive Pathfinder is a light truck, because the Pathfinder is actually classed as a small SUV.
Okay.
The distinction between small SUV and standard SUV is the gross vehicle weight rating. So the maximum weight with a payload. But the Pathfinder's GVW is 5,985 pounds. Anything under 6,000 pounds is a small SUV.
Wow.
If it's over 6,000 pounds, it's a standard SUV.
It's a tax write-off over 6,000 pounds.
Exactly. And I'm pretty sure that a Pathfinder could actually support several hundred pounds more than that, but it was just an arbitrary decision. Nissan said, okay, we're not going to allow this. We're only going to rate this up to 5985, so it's 15 pounds short of the threshold. To make it a small SUV. But now the Murano, which is quite a bit smaller, is actually not an SUV at all. It's classed as a mid-size station wagon
or a pretty sweet convertible.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, what's interesting is my impression of the Pathfinder was that it's like a slightly elevated Wagon Queen family truckster kind of facsimile. It just feels like a big station wagon.
Right. Exactly. Which is, that's why, you said it's whatever a crossover or an SUV today is, whatever you decide to call it. So any vehicle can be either one. The Pathfinder is the modern station wagon, modern full size station wagon.
Yeah.
Whereas, and Jeremy asked, if it's all-wheel drive, and no, it's not. I mean, Toyota calls the CHR a crossover, but at least here in North America, it's only available with front-wheel drive. They do an all-wheel drive version elsewhere, but here it's front-wheel drive only. but it's still a crossover.
Yeah, that one's an odd one. Strangely, it's pretty good to drive. But you can get, a Grand Cherokee in 2-wheel drive. So it's the same kind of thing.
But it's a standard SUV.
Right. Yeah, I think length has something to do with it, but at the end of the day, we're kind of giving opinion-based non-answers. Because that's really all we have. It's not
because
it's not a defined class.
It literally is the fact that it's whatever a manufacturer decides to call a crossover. That there is no definition of a crossover.
Yeah, and I think the biggest stretches are when it gets compact, when you're down to something like the Bolt or the Buick Encore. Those to me are not crossovers. They're too small. They're too stubby. Those are hatchbacks.
Well, the Encore, is no different from, from the Kona or the Chevy Trax, which is, on the same platform as the Encore. It's the same size.
And I don't think the Trax is, I don't know.
Well, by that definition, then none of these small crossovers are crossovers. They're all hatchbacks.
I could support that.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made for that.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a totally reasonable definition.
Okay. So we have not helped Jeremy at all. Maybe we have.
Well, we have to the degree that we've explained that, the whole premise of a crossover is utter nonsense.
So what it should mean though is that performance crossovers are sports cars because they can be X5M, for example. I don't know if I wouldn't call that a crossover now that I think about it. That's an SUV.
Jaguar F-Pace?
Sure. It's still kind of an SUV. That's weird. Now that I think about it. Oh, what about the
a Porsche Cayenne GTS? That's more of a sports car than many so-called sports cars.
That is true. I'm trying to think of don't they have a version? Doesn't Chevy have a version of the Equinox? It's their midnight trim or their red.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually have any more performance. It's just an appearance package.
Yeah, of course. It's I don't know. I'm drawing a blank.
If you want more performance in that kind of segment, you got to look at something like the Edge ST.
Right. I was just gonna say Edge ST. There you go. That's a sports car.
No, I don't think. I doubt it.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah.
But then again, you look at something like the Tesla Model X, which is
that's just a hunk of shit.
Should be called but based on its configuration,
that's a minivan.
Or it could be a crossover.
It's a minivan
or an SUV. I think they call it an SUV. But it'll go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. So that's a sports car too.
Fine. No, that's per street. That's just drag race focused because it can't sustain any kind of high performance use. I don't know. The Model X is it's ungainly. It's whatever. It's a minivan.
Well, it is hideous, but that's a whole other argument.
And we don't hate Tesla. I think we should just say I don't want to talk about Tesla this week just because there's nothing really sort of worth covering that we're going to do justice to. If you want to hear about Tesla in depth, go listen to the Autonocast. They're much better at that than I am. At least you're probably fine.
Or go look at Twitter.
Yeah. But none of the actual Tesla news this week has really been about Tesla. It's been about Elon Musk, and I don't want to talk about Elon Musk. So,
all right,
moving on.
Let's wrap it up there.
Yeah, we're done.
We're done.
Yeah, this is episode 74. We'll come back again soon with episode 75, and that's all there is to that.
See you all next time.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.